Hi, good morning everyone. So we are going to start with our new session for Java programming. Today we are going to discuss about the classes and objects. So we'll wait for a couple of minutes, let other people join, and then we can start up with our session. Okay guys, so let's start up with the things. You can see we have done few sessions earlier where we discussed up the basic programming about Java, introduction to the Java, conditional constructs, for loop, while loop, right? So we have been writing up all these programs in the classes. We have been writing up all these programs in the classes. So we need to understand what are these classes, right? What are these classes? Because all of your Java programming will be writing up classes and objects. These are the two terms you will use like almost every program, right? Every program. So what are these classes? What are these objects, right? Why we should use them and what is the purpose? So we have to discuss up all these things first. So now to start with, what are classes and what are objects, right? So classes and objects. Now if I talk about the classes, and objects, what is the relation between them? We can define the relation that classes are blueprint of object, right? So this is very much like a textbook kind of definition. Classes are blueprint of object. Now when I say object, why we need object? So this is because we are following the approach of object oriented programming structure, right? Object oriented programming structure. What are the different programming structure we have? What are the different programming structure we have? We have the procedural programming structure, right? We have procedural programming structure. So when I talk about procedural programming, why are we not using it in Java? Because Java supports object oriented programming only. For the procedural programming, we can use languages like C. C++ supports both procedural programming and object oriented programming, right? Now what is the difference between object oriented programming and procedural programming? Why we need classes in object oriented programming? So let's understand the difference of object oriented programming and procedural programming. In object oriented programming, we'll go with the procedural programming first. In the procedural programming, you are writing up the instructions, right, without defining like who is doing it, right? Who is doing it? For example, suppose I want to write up save the information of a teacher, right? I want to save the information of a teacher and a student, right? So I'm going to write all the information about a teacher and the student inside the same program, right? Inside the same program. So maybe I go and declare up the teacher variables. I go and declare up the student variables, everything inside the same program, same file. So I may have to define up the variables very carefully. They should not have any conflict. I cannot take a name variable for both. I cannot take a name variable for both. I may have to go and write teacher underscore name, student underscore name, right? Now, if someone at this point is not aware of what is variable, he should go back to the first 6 sessions, watch them, and then again come to this session, right? Watch the recording of this session. So teacher name and student name. Now you see, this way we can have a lot of variables, lot of attributes of teacher, where I will have to write teacher underscore that attribute name, student underscore that attribute name, right? So in this case, I have to write up many variables and all at one place, right? So the maintenance can be very high. Maintenance can be very high. And if you write up a big program in procedural programming, it can be quite confusing because of its number of attributes, right? All the code, all the instructions that are passed is inside the methods, right, or functions. So you write every instruction inside the methods or the functions. And you have to go to the top to bottom approach. So your method should be declared first before its usage, right? So you cannot just think of, okay, I write my method later, define somewhere later, but I can use it in the previous method also. So these all things were corrected. These all things were like performed better inside the OOPS programming, right? They were performed better inside the OOPS programming. So in the OOPS programming, they said that, okay, let's go and create up the separate kind of wrappers. So if I am going to write up a teacher instructions or teacher class information, I mean teacher's information, let's put it inside a wrapper, and that wrapper was called as a class. Similarly, students information can be set inside another wrapper, and that will go inside another class, right? So that's why class is set to be a capsule. Class is set as a capsule or as a wrapper where I can keep all my information about a single entity, right? You are not going to write a class like teacher and student. No, this will not be a class. This is not a class, right? We are not going to write a class where I will say, okay, order and shipping. We are going to write a class which will only contain the information of order. We will write a class which will contain the information of the shipping. These both classes are going to be different, right? Why they are going to be different? Because I should have the information of a specific entity in a specific location, right? So now all these things are called as objects. All these things are called as objects. So objects can be the value. Object can be the value of the class. For example, if I say teacher, right, a teacher. So if I want to write the information of a teacher, teacher can be John, right? Teacher can be Peter. Now these teachers, for the teacher, now when I say teacher, teacher is a common entity, right? It can be a information about any teacher. So where is the teacher? The teacher is going to be John, right? Teacher is going to be Peter. So we will define a class. We'll define a class about a teacher, right? We'll define a class about a teacher. Whenever you have to define the class about a teacher, you will write the class keyword, right? And the name of the class. The name of the class should go in the Pascal case. Name of the class should go in the Pascal case. That means your first letter, the first letter should be in initial caps, and any subsequent word also will have the first letter as initial capital uppercase. Okay. Now moving ahead, if I say that what can this teacher class do, right? Teacher class will be a blueprint. Teacher class will be a blueprint of what a teacher looks like, right? What a teacher can do. So teacher class can have some attributes. So we are going to write some attributes about the teacher. Okay. And then we are going to write what this teacher can do. What this teacher can do. Okay. So teacher can teach, teacher can take the attendance, right? Teacher gets the salary. So what are the attributes? Attributes are the information about the teacher. Attributes are the information about the teacher. For example, what is the name of a teacher, right? What is the address of the teacher? What is the email of the teacher, right? And what the teacher can do? It can mark the attendance. Teacher can teach, right? So now we have to define this class. We have to specify that there is a teacher, and these are the work that teacher is going to do. So in the attributes, we are going to write in the form of variables, and in the form where I have to give the task for the teacher, I will write it in the form of methods. Okay, variables and methods. Right. So now I want to define this teacher, and then I want to create one teacher. When I say define one teacher, it's only a blueprint. This is not going to take any memory in your program. Whenever I'm going to write a class is not going to take any memory, right? It's only a blueprint. The memory would be consumed when you create a teacher, right? Create a teacher means you have to now allocate the memory to save the information of a new teacher, one teacher, right? So how are you going to create a new teacher? You will say teacher T1 is equal to new teacher, right? So this is what called as creation of the object, right? When I say this whole statement is creation of object, many students I have seen, they say that T1 is object, right? T1 is object. This is wrong. This is wrong. This is not an object. T1 is reference to object, right? T1 is the reference to the object. T1 is storing the reference to the object. Got it? T1 is storing the reference to the object. So I have a teacher blueprint. I have a T1 teacher now created. So T1 is going to contain the reference to the object. And what is object over here? Object is the memory allotted. Object is memory allotted. Okay. So whatever memory is allotted, we'll discuss later, like where is that memory, what are the type of memories allotted, right? We'll go into some like depth of this whole understanding. So object is memory allotted, right? So here, now if I want to create a teacher class, how am I going to write it correctly? So let's write first class teacher, right? Parenthesis open and try to close it also, so that you should not get any errors related to the opening and the closure of the parenthesis. This is like very frequent error what people get. So class teacher, and I have to define the information of the teacher class, right? I have to define the information of the teacher class. So the first thing I'm going to do is I will say name of the teacher. I want to save the name of the teacher. Without the name, I cannot identify a teacher, right? So I'll write string. I have to define the information, the type, about what type of value I want to take. So I want to save a value of string type, right? String name. String name. Next, the teacher can have an email ID. Okay. So string name, string email, and I can now write some task also, what teacher can do. So I will write a void, right? Void, or let's discuss about this void later. First, let's complete up our class only. So here I take a teacher class. Now I want to create the object. So to create the object, I'll say teacher T1 is equal to new teacher, right? Teacher T1 is equal to new teacher. Now this is going to create. Now assume that this is my computer's memory, right? The memory allotted to the program. Inside that, I am going to create a new teacher. So new teacher would be created like this somewhere here, right? Some memory is allotted. Assume that this is some memory allotted. So inside this, I have two information, name and email, right? Name and email. So I'm going to save the information of the name and email. This is just a representation, right? Don't think that this is the actual style, how it is going to allot the memory in my system. So when this teacher object is created T1, right? T1 will be a variable. T1 will be a variable which will be pointing to the object, right? Which would be pointing to the object. So this T1 is going to contain some reference, right? This T1 is going to contain some reference of the memory allotment. How the memory allotment is done? It is done when you write the statement new teacher, right? It is done when you write the statement new teacher, right? So people who have connected to this session, if they just write yes or no, what they are trying to like, if they have any questions, is it clear to them? If they write yes or no in the chat section, at least I will be aware that they can hear me, they can view the screen, everything is going good, stream is going good, right? So new teacher, this right hand side statement is going to create a new object, right? Creates object. This statement creates an object which is here, right? So create object is the statement which is at this point. Now inside this create object, I'll store my value, okay, which we have to yet to give. So this object will be referenced. This returns the reference, right? This returns the reference, and that reference is stored inside T1. And if it is storing up, so what I can call it as variable, right? This is not a normal variable. This is a special kind of variable which is reference variable. So I cannot go and write string T1 is equal to new teacher. This is not possible, right? This is not possible. Why? Because I'm saving a reference, right? Object returns a reference, and reference can be saved inside the same type. If you are returning a teacher's reference, you have to store it inside the teacher's variable only. If you are storing up the string reference, you have to store it inside the string variable. If you are returning up the, let's say, book, we have a book class. Assume we have a book class. So I have to return it inside the book, save it inside the book reference only. Okay. So we have the teacher T1 is equal to new teacher, reference variable, and create object. Reference variable is T1. Create object will be done by new teacher. I hope everyone is getting the point. Okay. Right. Moving ahead. Okay. Moving ahead. Now we are going to say, I want to create this in my notepad and I want to see how it runs, right? So now we'll write this class. And I'll create a new folder. I'll call it as 2020-10-31. So today is like last day of this month. So now we are going to write a new class here. So teacher, right? Teacher.java. So I'm going to write a new class, new file. I'll create a new file teacher.java, and this teacher.java will contain the class. Oops, I forgot to write this teacher word. Okay, so class teacher. Now see how you are writing up your parentheses, how you are opening and closing it. Even your advanced text editors are going to help you a lot, right? They are going to help you a lot to remind you, like, you have to start your parentheses from this place to this place. So class teacher, and inside this class teacher, I'm going to write my attributes. So let's take a attribute string name, right? And then I'll have a string email. We'll have a string name and a string email. So this is the information of the teacher. How can I use this information? This is a class I have created, right? I want to create the object of this. So don't forget your main method. Okay. So we are going to write a class as main class. I'm writing up everything inside the same notepad right now. Once we move to the IDE, or we will be writing it in the different files, we'll be writing them as the public classes, right? Public class teacher, public class main class, because a public class, there can be only one public class inside a single file. You cannot write multiple public classes in the same file. So class main class, I will write my public static void main string arguments. Right now one can say that earlier if I was writing up everything inside my single class and I was writing up main method there, so it was more easy. I don't have to maintain so many number of the classes. Exactly, when you are going to write the code, right, when you are writing the code first time, you will always think of, okay, I want to save my time, let's write everything inside the same file. But remember, you may have to come back later and update that code. You may have to come back later and update that code, maybe for the maintenance, maybe for upgradation. And at that time, you should not come into a feeling that what mess have I written, right? So therefore, writing up number of classes is far better, so that you can jump into that specific class and maintain it. Your code may be read by others also. There can be a team of developers who are working on the same project, same features. So in that case, ensure that your code should be well documented, well maintained, so other programmers can read. Even it should be easy for you to read after a time. Okay, so we have written two different classes. So all the teacher information is pushed to the teacher class, and the main information will go into the main class. So this main class is just a name, right? Don't consider that this is a special name. It's just a name. I can write it like application. Okay, I can write it like app. So it's fine. You can give any good name to it, which is logical and understanding that, okay, this is a class and this can be related to the main class, which contains the main method. So public static void main, we have already discussed that this is a main method. Now here I am going to create the teacher class object. Teacher t1 is equal to new teacher, right? So I have created a new teacher. Remember, this whole statement can be created. This whole statement can be broken into multiple steps. So here you are going to create a variable to save reference, right? So we can create a variable to save the reference. Next, in this variable, you cannot use this t1 separately. It needs to be initialized. If I just go and write system.out.println and try to print this t1, it is going to give me an error. It will say local variables cannot be initialized, right? Local variables cannot be initialized, cannot be used without initialization. You cannot use the local variable without initialization. So you have to write this t1, you have to initialize it. So how can I initialize this t1? Let's go and initialize this. So I'm going to say initialize t1. T1 is equal to new teacher. Remember, I'm writing about the teacher, but I cannot go and write t1 is equal to John Doe, right? John Doe. This is the name. The format is a string, so you cannot save it in the teacher directly. Teacher contains the variables which will contain the data. Teacher class contains the variable which will contain the data. So here the teacher name email, the teacher will contain the name and the email. So here we are not going to write what is inside this teacher. Here we are going to write what is this t1. So I will go and write t1 is equal to new teacher. This allocates the memory, right? This allocates the memory. When I say allocates the memory, means it may have given you some space to save the name and the email, but to go to that name and email, you have to go through t1, right? T1 is like a locator. T1 is the reference to the name and the email of that particular teacher. How many teacher we have created? One, right? T1. So now here I want to save the information of the teacher. Before that, many times I have seen people writing up t1 and printing it. Remember, this is just a reference. This will not show you any value. This will not show you any value. Let's try to compile this. So here I'll go for trainings, Java, batch 10, and let's go for today's folder. So Java C, and I'm going to compile it as teacher.java, right? Compilation is successful. There is no error. And if I run this program, it's going to give me a complex address kind of thing to be displayed. Let's try to run this. So while running up my code, I have to give my class which contains the main method. Okay, it was not main class, it was app. So Java app, and you see it's showing teacher @ 6ff3c5b5. For my understanding, I can think of, okay, it's trying to show there is a teacher @ this. So it's like a reference. It's telling that some teacher information is saved on this address. Some teacher information is saved at this address, right? So teacher @ 6ff3c5b5. This is not going to give me any data. This is not making me understand any information who this teacher is. But if I try to use this information, right, where is this information saved? It is saved inside. It is saved inside T1, right? So instead of printing T1, I will try to print T1.name, T1.email. So same way I can go and write T1.name is equal to, let's say, John Doe, right? And T1.email is equal to, I'll write its email. So I'll say john@testmail.com. Fine. So now you see you are supplying some data to the T1, but you are not writing T1 is equal to John Doe. You are writing T1.name. So first thing, define your class. Whenever I say you need to use a class, you have to write class name, define its attributes. I want to use this class. I will write the variable declaration of the class and then the initialization. Without declaration and initialization, you cannot use the object of the class. So the teacher T1 is equal to new teacher. That was the object initialization. After that, I'm going to store some value inside that object. So where have I stored it? I have stored that value using T1.name, T1.email, right? So John Doe is the value that is supplied to T1.name. John @testmail.com is the value T1.email. Okay. So both these values are supplied to the respective variables. Fine. I want to display it back. So as I said, we are not going to display it back using T1. Instead, we will supply it as T1.name, right? T1.name. And similarly, I'll display the value of email. So these are hard-coded values. We will also try to understand how to take the input from the user, right? But everything goes step by step. Everything cannot be completed in a single session, right? Java is vast. So here we are going to give some value into the variables of the class. I'm going to give some value inside the variables of the class, and then I'm trying to print it. So we have to recompile our program. Whenever you make any changes, recompile your program and rerun the class. So now you see what is output: John Doe and John @testmail.com. So I have created one object, right? I have created one object. Remember, I have created one object, and then if you want, you can reuse. This object is still in the life. Right now, I'm not talking about the object life cycle totally, but yes, this object is still here. You can reuse it, but when you want to reuse it, its value will be changed, right? For example, if I write T1.name is equal to Peter Parker, right? And then I say T1.email is equal to peter@testemail.com. Fine. So now what has happened over here? T1 is not immutable, right? It can change its value. It can change its information. So T1.name is equal to Peter Parker. So the value inside that T1, right? Value inside the T1 is getting changed. Remember, when I say immutable, that is in the term of only the value. Okay. So t1.name is equal to Peter Parker, t1.email is equal to peter@testemail.com. So now the values that are stored on the name earlier than this is going to be changed. Right. So the values that are saved on the T1 in line number 14 would be John Doe. But once it prints and it comes on the line number 24, you are replacing the previous value with Peter Parker. Right. Now suppose one says that no, I want both the values. I want both values. So what are you going to do in that case? If you want both the values, then in that case, we would have to create one new object. Right. We would have to create one new object. So here I'm going to write one more object. So I'll say teacher t2 is equal to new teacher. Teacher t2 is equal to new teacher. So teacher 2 is equal to t2 dot name is equal to Peter Parker, and t2 dot email is equal to Peter at the rate, let's write test email.com. Okay, so now I have the second teacher also. So now if we go and display its value, again I have to go and write system dot out dot print line, and I'm going to write t2 dot name. This time I'll write t2 dot name because I want to display the information of that teacher number 2 whose information is saved inside the t2. Got it? So here we are going to write the information. Here we are going to write the information of email also. Okay, email also. So t2 dot name, t2 dot email. So this is good. Now we have two teachers. We are going to show the information of both the teachers. So if I go and compile this, let's look at over here, Java app. So you can see the information of two teachers at this point, right? You can see the information of two teachers, John Doe, Peter Parker. But remember, programming should not contain the repetition of the statements. Programming should not contain the repetition of the statements. If you look at my code, I am printing the name and the email in the duplicate way. I am printing it for T1, I am printing it for T2, right? Though I am doing it for the in adding of the data also, but we'll see it later. If you look at this point, that I'm having repetition in the display of the data, that is exactly it. Actually, it is a repetition, right? So we should handle this. So how can I handle this? How can I write it once, use it multiple times? How can I write it once and use it multiple times? So I'm going to tell my program that all the data should be taken from the object and displayed. So the thing I'm doing over here, I'll copy it. I'll go to my teacher class and I can see teacher information can be displayed. So I can write a void display method, void display method. And here I can write system.out.println, right? Print the name. I'll not write T1 because T1 is not available in your teacher class. It is inside the app, name and email. So we are displaying the name and email. So in the teacher class, I'm saying there is a information to be displayed, that is name and email, right? Where is the teacher information? In T1 and T2. How will the class know that which name I have to display, which email I have to display? So very easy. It will be taken, that information would be taken from the reference who is calling display, right? So if T1 is calling display, it will pick up the information, the name information from the T1. It will look into the T1 location. Where is there a name? Yes, pick it up. Is there an email? Yes, pick it up, right? So here we go for the t2.name. I don't have to write this also. I can remove and I can say simply t2.display, right? So now if you look at this code, looking little compact, not much, but yes, because we are at very starting stage of learning programming, so we need to learn a lot of things more. So I discussed this method, right? So we created a method. I'm using it with the object t1.display. So I'm going to pick up the value t1.display and t2.display, right? So they both are going to print the information of name and email from their reference, the reference which is calling it, right? The reference which is calling it. So save this, go back and let's rerun it once to see how it is looking. So compile your Java C teacher, run your Java app and see output is good. It prints John Doe and Peter Parker information. Right. So now let's talk about that. If I want to write up a student class student. Now see how your code is going to be cleaner because you are writing up the different classes, right? Your code is going to be in a different class. So let's say after a couple of months you have some more updates to be done for the student class. I'll get into this student class and then I'm going to only update this student class only, or there is a bug fixing, right? So you don't have to change the teacher, you don't have to change the courses, attendance, everything. You can jump into the student class and you can update it. Student name, string, email, string, course, right? So when I talk about a string, means it is a group of characters, string name, string email, string course. So I can similarly write a display for the student and then utilize it inside my app class. Okay. One common question I have found, or even I have seen the observation, like observe that many people when they start learning up the programming, they write more of the objects inside the main class, which contains the main method, right? So they are in a habit or understanding that objects can be created inside the main method only, right? Objects can be created inside the main method only. It is exactly not. You can create the objects anywhere, right? You can create the objects anywhere. So I can create the object in other classes also. For example, suppose I have a class course and this contains string name, right, and string description of the course, or let's say double fee of the course. So I can write the course object here also, course. Got it? So I can write the class course at this point, right? So this is how you are going to define up your classes, and this is how you are going to define up your objects, right? So I hope we are good with this classes and objects, right? Let's take a new class over here. I'm going to take a class point.java. So class point, and inside this class point, a point on a graph can have two values, that is x and y, right? A x and a y, int x and int y. So now I'm going to write another class. I'll call it as point app. Write my main method public static void main string arguments. So let's create up the object of this point. Point 1 is equal to new point. Okay, point 1 is equal to new point. If I try to display the value of point, system.out.println point 1, what is this going to print? This is going to print a reference, prints reference, right? Some logical reference. I am not sure if it is a like exact address of some location. It is a reference, right? Some logical reference. Second, I want to print the value of point 1 dot x, right? And similarly, I am going to print system.out.println point 1 dot y, right? Point 1 dot y. So I'm printing point 1 dot x, point 1 dot y. So let's see, without assigning any value, what actually it is going to display. So we'll compile this program. We are going to compile this program, Java C. It is at the same location, point.java. So both the classes would be compiled. Now I will have a class point app, right? So run your point app. Now see, the reference is showing good, but then your x and y is displaying 0 0. That means I have a value inside this x and y, right? I have a value inside this x and y. This is the default value, right? So here the variables that you declare in the class, variables declared in class have some default value, right? Some default value. So what are those default value? Int contains 0, right? Int contains 0. Char contains blank value, okay? And guys, sorry, there would be some background disturbance, unable to like solve it out, but yes, we'll try to keep the session short today, and in upcoming couple of weeks probably we will be sorting out all this stuff. So char contains the blank value, and if I talk about the double or float, it contains 0.0 as the default value, right? String is going to contain the null. So these are the default values, right? Default values. So here int is there, so it is going to contain 0 0 values, right? So don't get confused that I am not assigning any value. Where is this value coming from? So it is because your value, your variable have a default values. Remember, variables declared in the class have some default value. Just to write over here, variables declared in methods, right? Variable declared in methods do not contain, right? Do not contain or are not initialized. In methods do not have default value. They are must to be initialized, right? They are must to be initialized. Right. So very important point, your variables inside the class must be declare the variables inside the class have some initial value, default value. The variables declared inside the method must be initialized. For example, if you look at this, right, this variable, if I just define it like this, it is not initialized, no memory is allotted. If you go and write point 1 dot x, point 1 dot y, this thing will print you null. The line number 17 is going to print you null, and line number 18 will give you an error. It will say x is not point 1 is not initialized, right? So right now here, the first thing, 17 line will also give you an error because you are not initializing it, right? So here the error will be that not initialized, right? Point 1 variable, local variable point 1 is not initialized. So let's compile this. See, variable point 1 might not have been initialized. Definitely we have not initialized it. So let's initialize it. So now to initialize this, you can initialize it with two values. One is equal to null. Okay, a null value. So when it is a null value means nothing, no memory is allotted, right? And if I want to allot a memory, so I'm going to write is equal to new point. Got it? New point. So point 1 is equal to new point. So this way we are going to get the new point, save the information inside the new point, point 1 dot x, point 1 dot y. So if you want to save information, you can get that information here. Let's write it. Point 1 dot x is equal to, let's say, 10. Point 1 dot y is equal to, let's say, 10, right? So we have a point 1 being generated, and I'm having two values in it, right? I'm having x and y values being allotted. So if you go and compile this now, it will generate a point, print you the values. All right. I hope everyone would have understood the concept of classes and creating the objects from the classes. Right. So tomorrow we are going to do some advanced part of classes like constructors, okay, constructors, etc. So let's meet in the tomorrow session. I'll keep it up till here today, and we'll meet in the next session tomorrow. Have a nice time, great week and ahead. Thank you. Bye.